Hello, everybody. Welcome to SBI's Reimagining Main Street podcast. I'm Patrick Lee, and I'm here with Laura Richards. Today, we're going to talk about the coming tsunami. I know there's a lot of headlines, and there's some looking at the fact that small businesses are shuttering up relatively quickly here, and there's not really any good statistics around what this means or what's going to happen. I've seen some estimates around bankruptcies and some other things, but I don't think they're really actually taking into account the full breadth of what's occurring and how little time we have left to try to head this off. I know you've been researching a little bit of this, Laura, and have some stats and some concepts for us.
So according to Yelp, right now we have more than 80,000 businesses that have permanently shuttered. And that's just from March to now because of the pandemic. I was reading a New York Times article, 3,000 small businesses have shuttered just in New York City alone. And when we're talking about small businesses, I think it's important to kind of illuminate some of these businesses have been around for hundreds, tens and even hundreds of years. They've survived numerous big catastrophes, but this could be the one. And in the case of the businesses that are shuttered was the one that closed them. So some old family-owned businesses and even things that are iconic to the neighborhoods where they lived, which is definitely going to reshape the way those neighborhoods are and their neighbors, whether they're business neighbors or residential neighbors. So we're seeing a huge reshaping, and I don't think your word tsunami is an overstatement.
Yeah. So do you have some examples of some of these iconic businesses? I mean, I think it helps personalize it when people like actually here's some of the ones that are no longer with us.
Sure. There's a gun store that has been open since 1911 that has shuttered, an Irish pub that has been drawing crowds, political mostly, since the Reagan administration, a coffee shop in Brooklyn that residents, took shelter in 9/11 from the terrorist attacks in 2001. So there are a lot of businesses. Those are some of the ones in New York. And obviously, just in my hometown, I'm walking around the streets of Annapolis and seeing a lot of vacancies on Main Street, more than normal, and starting to look at things that are closing next. This is something that we're seeing. This is the tip of the iceberg.
It is the tip of the iceberg. And there's a couple of pieces to this that I don't think get looked at by the analysts and government and economic development. And even if they're looking at it, they're either purposely not, illuminating it, or they're just not consciously aware of the impact of it outside of their macroeconomic formulas. But one of the things that strikes me is every approach to this recession and economic catastrophe here has been around employment. So what government and what everyone is looking at is households. They're not looking at small business as a small business. They're looking at households. So, the PPP was created to try to keep people employed. The extra money at unemployment was to make sure that folks had enough for their household to survive, right? The stimulus checks were directed to individuals so we could put some money into that household, which we know goes back out into the economy. But ultimately, they're focusing on me in my house and my ability to pay my rent, feed my family, do that stuff. Okay, that works on a level for employees. But the issue with the small businesses is that small businesses, there's more there than just employees. And we're going to talk about that in a second, how much small business employs. But the truth of the matter is the small business owner has put everything into that business. So that's where they're investing their money. That's where their retirement is. That's where a lot of their capital is wrapped up in that business. And so their household may continue to survive with these stimulus and other things that help them do that. But their retirement, their medium term and even short term futures have have dropped. The possibilities have dropped dramatically here because the business is dying. They may be able to still feed people and all, but everything they had was tied up in that business. So I think it's important that we take a look at not just the impact on employment, but also the impact on the small business economy and on a whole lot of individuals out there who have put everything, they've bet everything on their business. I mean, we tend to look at what's happening on Wall Street, what's happening with the Dow, and so it's dropped, but just stay the course, it'll come back. Well, we don't know if this will come back. This is not a tracked entity for the most part. And the equity people have put into those businesses, we don't know if it's coming back. We don't track it at all. So before we get into that a little bit more, though, I'd like to get some numbers. I know you, like I said, you've been researching this a lot. So I know there's some numbers around, what percentage of the economy is small business? How much does it employ? What are those stats that we sort of need to know to have this conversation?
Well, Patrick, there are 31 million small businesses in the U.S. And last year they employed nearly half of the private workforce. So it was about 1.6 million jobs. And what I think is interesting about this is that we hear a lot when we talk about to our elected officials that they're pro-business, and I think most would even say they're pro-small business. But I think pandemics and times like these, when we go through these things, when we see what happens, that maybe they think that they're doing something for small business, but look at even the PPP, which was supposed to really only benefit small business. And then we looked at the allocation, the first wave of funding that flew out the door, and where it landed. And not only did it go to a lot of franchise businesses, not franchise businesses, but multi-unit operators. So their individual units qualified under the PPP. But those were the people that had the relationships with the bank and maybe even fast-acting lawyers that got their applications in. And that's why those funds were used up so quickly. So a lot of the resources don't actually trickle down to the people who need them most. So it was great that those funds were available, and for those people that got the PPP loans, it was great that they could keep their employees employed for a while. But like you said, that's a major Band-Aid. It helps them with their short-term cash flow issue, but longer term, as we see the pandemic hanging in there, it really is going to delay the inevitable.
So I think you made one misstatement there. I think the number of jobs employed by small business has to be larger than, I think, the number that you said.
1.6 million?
Yeah.
It created 1.6 million jobs.
Okay. Yeah. So here's I think where the disconnect comes, and I think it's hard for folks to sort of figure out, well, where do we go with this? What do we need to do? And I think the disconnect is keeping people employed is disincentivizing those who are employing them, right? If our whole goal is to make sure that you continue to pay some people so that they can go out and survive, the business owner has to be asking themselves, okay, all this money is there. I can get forgiven if I keep these people on. I don't have anything for them to do. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. There's no help necessarily for me with the business. And so I'm doing what I'm told. I'm applying for the PPP. I'm trying to get it forgiven by paying this. I'm applying for an EIDL, which is based almost entirely on, can you prove that your revenue's dropping, right? Like, we're not looking at how does a small business owner in this environment innovate? How do they protect everything they put into that business that they've invested into it? When do they pivot and say, I'm losing more money than this is worth? How many of these folks will even be able to come back after this is over and be entrepreneurs again? Are we assuming that all the small businesses go under, that those owners are going to open up a new business? Where does the capital come from?
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that at all. I think a lot of these people, as you pointed out, they invested their livelihood and their life into the business that they're operating, and will be hard pressed to come back from the devastation that's going to be reaped by the pandemic. You had an example. How many businesses came back post Katrina?
Well, I got really intrigued by the idea that we talked about COVID as being a natural disaster, right? Let's, instead of looking at it as a recession or a depression or an economic issue, let's look at it as if it was a natural disaster. And there was a bunch of models in the beginning of the pandemic where folks were showing like recoveries after natural disasters frequently are hockey stick like, right? Once a natural disaster is removed, you come in and start dealing with it, and things resurge. There's a resurgence, right? Versus recessions or depressions, those things which linger on, and it takes a long time for them to sort of come out of that. So I looked at Katrina, and the thing that was interesting was that after Katrina, 60% of small businesses in New Orleans City never came back. They never made it back. 40% of the businesses never even tried. So 60% of the businesses were gone after Katrina. 40% never even made an effort to come back. Okay. Now, New Orleans had a resurgence. It did have that hockey stick resurgence. In fact, it was one of the fastest growing cities in the country for a good period of time post Katrina. But the thing that was really interesting is 10 years out from Katrina, the levels of unemployment, the levels of employment in New Orleans were still below the pre-Katrina levels. So despite that resurgence and despite being a fastest growing city in the country, one of the fastest growing cities in the country, we still hadn't reached the employment levels within New Orleans that existed before Katrina. Now let's take Katrina as one event in one area of the country. And let's look at this as a national happening, this pandemic. Okay, this is happening all over the place. So what is our plan? Because if we don't figure out how to stem the collapse of the small business economy, there's a very good chance it's not coming back. You're better off trying to stop the collapse now, because if you expect it to come back, you're going to have to put a whole bunch of investment all over the place into bringing that back. So let's look at a small business owner, available liquidity of capital so that they can do things. Is it going to be less expensive to address it now while they're still open, there's still infrastructure, there's still life there? Or are you going to let it fall off the cliff and then 8 months from now or 10 months from now or whatever it is, look up and say, okay, we got to bring this back? How much more is it going to cost us to try to build brand new businesses and re-energize the economy after it's shuttered down than it is to try to deal with it now?
And I would also add, it's not just how much is it going to cost us, but what are we going to lose in our character of our communities? You can't go back and recreate a gun shop that was open in 1910. You can't come up with the history of, the old Ebbett Grill in Washington, D.C., one of the longest standing restaurants in D.C. that might be gone. We're losing part of our story, our history, when we lose small businesses as well. And it's important, I think, to the character and the communities and our Main Street environments that we do something.
And I think what you just said is incredibly important, because it is the character. If you take, we're in Annapolis, right? We're based out of Annapolis, and Annapolis is a historic city with a lot of character. That's why you go to Annapolis, for that character. Now, we've all been in parts of the country where it looks exactly like another part of the country, right? You've got your fast food restaurants, you've got your box stores, you've got a highway, some parking lots, and you don't know where you are. If you didn't know where you were when you're there, you're not going to be able to figure it out, right? That's not a small business economy. The small business Main Street economies are those iconic businesses. They are those ones that are part of the culture of an area, right? And they work with each other, because the other ramification of this is, let's just take Annapolis for a second. Walking down Main Street in Annapolis, and if every other or every third place is shuttered up, that's going to have a dramatic impact on the other businesses that are there and on the culture and feel of the town. So this transcends that individual business also.
Well, and I think it's really important to know, if you want an environment that doesn't look like everywhere else, like you said, you as a community, we have to do something to help each other, help one another. And we've had a whole other podcast on that. But I'll tell you, I was recently in Rehoboth Beach. My family has been going there for years, in Delaware. And I was walking on the main drag there, Rehoboth Avenue. And there is now a Rita's Italian Ice. There's a Dairy Queen. There is a Mason's Lobster Roll. There is another big franchise, Jimmy John's, all in the second block of Rehoboth Avenue. All of these places used to be George's Lunch, Louie's Pizza. They were all local Rehoboth entities. And I just saw another one. We love a Nicoboli from Nicola's, and Nicola's is moving out of downtown Rehoboth and up onto Route 1. So at least they're not going out of business. But what I'm saying is our hometowns, our main streets are dramatically changing. And I think the pandemic is going to accelerate this.
I think it absolutely is. And so we're here, and we're sort of down on the efforts that have been made to help small business at this point. And I'm not down on them in terms of the intention, and I'm not down on them in terms of the fact that real money's invested. I'm down on them in terms of how they are aimed, right? Like I said, they're aimed at keeping people employed, and they're aimed at keeping households alive and active. And there's value in that. I'm not denying that. But I think what needs to happen next is a capitalization of small business, Main Street businesses, okay? Whether that's the Small Business Administration working through the banks to underwrite loans the same way the SBA has forever, but expanding that. I mean, the Fed has said that they're going to make sure that there's liquidity out there, that no matter what happens, they're going to make sure. Well, if that's the case, that liquidity should be made available in ways that it gets into the hands of these small business owners. And I think that's incredibly important, because right now, I mean, I have clients and they're all trying to figure it out. So they haven't taken the plywood and gone and screwed it up over the windows, right? I mean, they're sitting there going, okay, how do I come out of this? How do I innovate? What do I do? But their options of capitalization of their business is already tied to policies for other entities. We don't want unemployment to get too bad. All those things, and they need a more malleable method of being able to use this. They need investment into their business. They need investment into innovation. Okay, so should the SBA come out, or should other economic entities, and say, look, we're doing innovation grants or innovation loans, right? If you come to us with a way to restructure your business that changes up things based on what we're seeing here, the government, SBA, will underwrite loans to help you get there, right? Let's put the impetus on the small business owner, because remember, they're entrepreneurs. They're thinking this stuff. They've got good ideas. They don't need bureaucrats telling them what to do or looking at macro numbers. They need to be enabled to be that entrepreneur. So what programs can we create? How can we get money into the hands of the folks who are trying to be innovative but they're not being asked what needs to happen. They're being told, here's your only option.
So are you going to answer that question?
Well, am I going to answer what question? I think that as small business owners, we need to get creative. And that means we need to go to our funding institutions and we need to say, look, you have relationships, the banks, they have relationships with the SBA, right? Economic development corporations throughout the country, they have relationship with the SBA. As the business owner, here's what we really need. And we don't have the relationship with the SBA. We don't know how they work. We don't know what that is. They're just this entity that sits out off to the side and underwrites a loan every once in a while for us, but that's all we know. So we need you to communicate to them. And this should benefit those entities anyway. It should benefit the banks and it should benefit economic development corporations, because their goals are to get money out into the hands of folks as an investment. And the reason they like SBA loans is if the government's underwriting it, there's little risk to the banks and to those corporations. So let's up that. Let's go tell folks what we need. And I also think we talk a lot about getting our local business entities involved in this. That's a great issue for chambers of commerce to go and lobby about, right? Let's push for what the local business community needs. And that's even a competitive thing. Those communities that get aggressive about this and get going on this probably are going to be the ones that get the funding and have that innovation, and those that don't won't. So I mean, it's going to be a competitive marketplace within this context also. And honestly, that's what we want. Allowing the market to actually work, not simply bureaucratizing it, right? Those that get innovative should survive this. They should thrive, right? And those that don't, we shouldn't be funneling money into them. So if we did this without it being about simply keeping people alive, which we need to do, I'm not saying not, but if we made our economic stimulus for small business about innovation in the small business market and about letting these entrepreneurs actually have influence over where this goes, I think our outcomes are going to be a lot better.
Well, thank you. That's a little optimistic for people, that they can get out there and make innovation happen for them and maybe secure some extra funding to keep their business going.
Unfortunately, it's not up to us with just ideas, and we've got to go apply pressure. And that's what we've said every single time in every one of these podcasts is small business Main Street needs to band together, find ways to go out there and try to influence the policies that are being created right now.
Advocacy is key.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for listening today to Reimagining Main Street with Patrick Lee and SBI. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.